Hi everyone, how you doing? Hope you're having a good Sunday. Whether or not you're checking this out on a Sunday or not. I just want to share some thoughts with you regarding my ideas around things like vocational grading. So vocational grading, and I'm specifically looking at a lot of OCR and BTEC style courses, will do things like setting out a grid of criteria that learners will need to achieve. For example, a Pass 1 or a P1, or a merit or a distinction, and they'll all be labelled Merit 1, Merit 2, Distinction 1, whatever it might be. And then you have a set of criteria that the learners need to achieve. So, for example, if they're looking at developing a website, then they need to include things like adding in tables, or being able to change headers, or whatever it might be. However, what I have found down the years, and a number of students have actually kind of raised the question with me, that ultimately there is no distinguishing between a good piece of work and a truly exceptional piece of work. They just get the same grade. Otherwise, obviously, as a teacher, you can give them all the wonderful praise in the world in terms of your feedback. You can say, this is an amazing piece of writing, etc., etc. But actually, there is no tangible result for those guys. They still get the same grade. And, I think that ultimately, being as things like pass rates are set so high, all the students are expected to pass. You have to go some to not pass one of these courses, to be honest. We really need to try and find a way to distinguish between a good piece of work, a very, very good piece of work, or a piece of work which maybe is just scraped through by the skin of its teeth. Now, BTEC have started to incorporate exams into their vocational style courses. It's completely crazy. And you have to think about why these students are doing these courses in the first place. So their argument is that it makes it more rigorous, but actually it's just a really crazy thing to do, because students do these vocational style courses because they want to do it as opposed to doing an A-level. If they wanted to do exams, they would do A-levels. And you don't need exams to make the course more rigorous. You can do radical things like lowering the pass rate will actually improve the standard of work, because the tutors will be able to be so much more rigorous with their marking. So therefore the learners have to submit better work, as opposed to, as a tutor, you feel under pressure to, especially with the pass criteria, to potentially put through a piece of work which actually really you probably shouldn't. It is unfortunate, but the powers that be say that something like 97% of students have got to pass this thing. It's a crazy number, and exams are not the right way of making it more rigorous. And not allowing resubmissions is an equally bizarre thing. It's against every teaching philosophy ever made. Students and people in general learn by making mistakes, by trying stuff out, and if it doesn't work, then you change it. Not allowing a resubmission is just crazy. And I know they're doing it to kind of mirror a GCSE and A-level style exam, but ultimately this is not GCSE or A-level, this is a vocational style course. And therefore there's going to be a lot of coursework, and therefore it is going to need some resubmissions. But also what you need to remember with GCSE and A-level is that when you're marking an A-level or GCSE paper, that actually you get marks for specific bits in that paper, and you don't need to complete the whole thing and pass the whole thing. Whereas with a BTEC or an OCR criteria, you need to hit everything in the spec, otherwise you can't pass it. And not allowing a resubmission for that is just bizarre. But anyway, I'll move on past that. A solution which I thought of is actually the new GCSE style grading could be some kind of solution here. Now, it may sound more complex, it may sound more work, but actually I think with maybe a bit more thought, we may be able to kind of work something. Whether or not they take this on is not my decision to make. But I'm thinking that with every pass criteria at the minute, you associate, or say pass every criteria, you associate a pass, a merit, or a distinction, and you pass or you fail that. But rather than doing that, you could actually assign your pass criteria with a number. So rather than you pass or you fail, you could allocate a number, for example, between 0 to 5. And then it would maybe better reflect those students that have done really good pieces of work could get a grade 5, and then those students who maybe haven't addressed everything within it or could have done a little bit better work could be given a 1 or a 2 maybe. So just thinking about this, if I show you a Excel sheet that I knocked up earlier, so see, this is a fictional unit. You can see there's 6 pass criteria, 3 merits, 2 distinctions, relatively standard. And I know it might need kind of fiddling with in the long run, but applying the GCSE style grading to it, you've got your 0, which is not good, all the way up to your grade 9, which is meant to be your really, really high level piece of work. And obviously, my logic here is you're not going to be getting your 8s and your 9s for the pass criteria, because your merits and your distinctions will be harder pieces of work, so therefore need to be weighted accordingly, almost like a maths paper where you have your lower and higher tier. So if you have your 6 pass criteria, they could potentially have grades between 0 to 5, like I said. So your 5 could be a really, really outstanding piece of work for that, but actually because the topic isn't as difficult as the merit and the distinction, you would only get a 5 for that. And it would go all the way down to 1 or 2. Now, obviously, when you get up to your merits and your distinctions, it will be a case of, say, for example, the merit, I've given a grading bracket of between 5 to 7. So if you meet that criteria, the minimum grade you're going to get is a 5. And you can go all the way up to 7 if it's a really good piece of work. Now, it'd be the same for distinction. So again, you have the bracket between 7 and 9. If you don't meet that criteria, you get 0. But what this kind of grading would allow you to do is you would potentially be able to not get every one of these. So for example, let's say you get, I'm just putting in some random grades here. So let's say, for example, you get some grades a bit like this, a bit scattergun, I know. You would then add up those grades and you would get an overall unit score. And this has been pretty rudimentary. I mean, I've literally kind of just gone down each one of these rows and gone, okay, so 1 is 6, but you may want to kind of look at that in greater detail later on. And what would it allow you to potentially do is say you could fail a criteria but still come out with a half decent grade from the course. Now currently, if students are doing these units and they get every pass, they get say 2 out of these 3 merits, and then they get 2 distinctions. So if they've missed 1 merit criteria, then they would come out of that unit with a pass, which to me doesn't seem like a fair grade, because you've got 2 out of the 3 merits and 2 out of 2 distinctions. But that's the way it's currently set out. And I think something like this would potentially allow much greater flexibility. Now, in terms of marking, you would potentially have more of a time sink in terms of you allocate a number rather than a pass or a fail. And then, of course, you would need to add it up. Now, there are plenty of pieces of software out there that do this for you in terms of adding it up. So, I'm sure somebody could come up with some kind of spreadsheet or a website where you can put in all the grades, and then it will come out with a final number. So I don't think you necessarily need to worry about that. But certainly, it may be a case of thinking a little bit differently, because, like I said, with current criteria, for example, that P1, if they don't meet everything in the spec for that P1, they don't pass the P1. Whereas with this, let's say they don't quite meet everything, rather than getting a complete fail, you'd actually get some kind of grade from it. So this gives students much better kind of feedback. If you're an employer and you're getting some kind of grading along here, BTECs have long been heralded as quite an easy thing to pass, because they are quite an easy thing to pass. But if you're kind of getting these higher grades, or at least if you're kind of falling up here, then it will give employers much better idea about your strengths and weaknesses in terms of your ability. I would say this is a more rigorous system, but it obviously would need a bit of tweaking later on. So yeah, it was just some ideas about how we could potentially change the grading for this. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying the weekend. I will see you soon. Bye bye.